It's 7:30 p.m. in Waukesha County, Wisconsin, where police respond to an alleged drunk driving crash that has just left a teenage girl and her dog fighting for their lives.
Yes, ma'am. She was in a car accident. She will be going to the hospital. Okay? So Memorial Hospital. I think that's it. I think it's my jaw, my leg, my leg got hurt. No!
I just wanted to make sure you were okay.
Are you okay?
Police identify the suspect, seen here, as 19-year-old Jason Zehe, who has yet to learn the severity of his alleged crime.
Is she okay? I'm okay.
Okay, she's taking deep breaths.
Were you in the car?
She is too.
I was the driver.
Can we get someone to there? Because there's a lady in there that's on the hallway.
The middle one?
Yeah, that's the one in the corner where there's a dog in the back seat.
Yeah, there's a paramedic over
Is
there.
there? I'm so sorry, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
The driver of the other vehicle didn't make it. What? No, they didn't. He repeats the question. More than once. They died? They died? What happens next is difficult to categorize cleanly. His response fractures. There is a word in the silence, maybe a phrase that sounds, for just a breath, less like devastation than something else. Then it collapses into the only question that seems to reach him. How old was she? She was 17. I should be going for life, honestly. I took a life. It is the clearest thing he has said all night. But somewhere between that sentence and the intersection it describes, somewhere in the hours of choices that nobody standing in that room was there to witness, a 17-year-old girl was driving home. She had Bleu in the car with her. She had arranged 3 Bibles in her family's rooms that morning. She had the right of way. There are people who move through a community in a way that leaves an impression wider than their age should allow. People who don't need a headline to explain why they mattered. Megan Voss was a senior at Waukesha West High School. A 4 gigapascals high honors, AP coursework, National Honor Society, Random Acts of Kindness Club, Bible Study Club, cheerleading. She played the viola. She had recently transitioned from her job as a hostess at Michael's restaurant in Waukesha to a co-op placement at Chiromed through the school's program. She had just gotten her brother hired at the restaurant she was leaving. She had a dog named Bleu. She loved him the way people love the animal that is always home when they get there. That morning, the morning of the 30th of December, 2024, Megan had purchased 3 Bibles, 1 for each member of her family, and placed them in their rooms while her grandfather was out at the gym. He came home to find them already there. Before we go any further, if you're someone who needs to understand why people do the things they do, you're exactly where you should be. This is The Malice Mind. Subscribe if you haven't already. Now, back to Megan. What cases like this demand what Megan deserves is to be understood as a complete person before she is understood as a victim. Because the legal process that followed her death will reduce her at some point to a name in a charging document. That evening, she got in her 1994 Audi Cabriolet with Bleu in the passenger seat, and she drove. At approximately 7:25 in the evening on the 30th of December 2024, witnesses near the intersection of Sunset Drive and Guthrie Road in Waukesha watched a Dodge Ram pickup truck approaching the intersection at a speed that did not make sense for the road it was on. It was not a driver who had drifted. Investigators would later confirm through evidence and witness testimony that Jason Zehe was traveling at approximately 66 miles per hour in a posted 30 mile per hour zone. He was not braking. Multiple witnesses described watching the truck flash its headlights as it came through, not in warning, but in a way that communicated something closer to intention. Several of them told officers they had the impression the driver was not going to stop. He did not. Megan was at the stop sign. Witnesses confirmed she had arrived at the intersection correctly, waited for vehicles with the right-of-way to clear, and had already entered the intersection lawfully when the truck came through. The collision was direct driver's side. Waukesha County DA-elect Leslie Bozay later said in court that the impact was such that the victim had very little chance of surviving. First responders found Megan unconscious but breathing. Bleu, still in the car beside her, had sustained severe spinal injuries. Troy Voss, Megan's father, arrived at the crash scene before she was transported. He knelt beside his daughter. He held her hand. He called her. She did not respond. When Bleu tried to move, Troy reached for him and was bitten the animal in pain and confusion, and Troy took the blood and did not let go of either of them. Megan was airlifted to Froedtert Hospital. She died while being prepared for surgery. Bleu was taken to emergency veterinary care. He was paralyzed. He was sedated. He survived the night in pain before his injuries were declared irreversible. He was euthanized the following day. Megan's mother, Julie, was in England. She got the call overseas. Jason Zahe was never hidden from investigators. He was standing at the crash site when officers arrived, visible, talking, mobile. What investigators were working to establish in the hours that followed was something harder to locate than a suspect. They were after the truth of what had happened. Because what they had in front of them was a young man who was, in real time and with reasonable consistency, sculpting the version of events he was willing to hand over. He told first responders he was fine. He didn't need to be seen by anyone. He circled back, with a persistence that officers documented, to the question of the hospital bill. Could he afford it? Could he avoid it? Could he leave? Officers told him more than once that the cost wasn't the issue right now. He kept returning to it. He confirmed he was the driver when asked. Then he asked whether the people he had hit were okay. Then he asked about his truck, whether it had a plate, whether the car belonged to him. The questions moved around each other without settling on anything that might explain what had actually occurred. Witnesses nearby gave officers a different picture entirely. Multiple people described watching the truck before the moment of impact coming through the area at speed, flashing its headlights, not decelerating toward any of the stop signs along its path. One witness told an officer they saw the truck coming and registered that it was not going to stop. They were right. In the ambulance, the space between what Jason was saying and what the evidence was suggesting started to close. Asked directly whether he had been drinking, he said, "No, nothing, not a drink." He offered to take whatever test investigators wanted, with the ease of someone making a gesture they expected to cost them nothing. Then, in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely, he said quietly, not directed at anyone, that he wished he wasn't drunk. A medic asked him to repeat it. He deflected, asked whether he seemed drunk, said he was asking about the beeping, but the word was already in the room. Farther down the corridor, other investigators were speaking with members of Megan's family. They described who she was: the 4 gigapascals, the National Honor Society, the scholarship, the nursing plan. Her grandfather described coming home from the gym that morning to find Bibles already placed in the rooms. Megan had put them there while he was out. The investigators thanked them. They did not have the complete picture yet of what the day had looked like on the other side of this. Jason's girlfriend, who had been in the truck with him and had been injured in the crash, was able to speak with officers from a separate location. Her account did not align with any version Jason had offered. She described a day that had begun with alcohol in the morning sangria, then her mother's bottle of wine. She described Zehe working through a significant portion of a full handle of 40% vodka over the course of the day. She had tried to take the bottle, given it to her mother. "I made the mistake of retrieving it," she had told him in the truck, that he was scaring her with how he was driving. He had been racing another vehicle in the minutes before the crash. She had looked down at her phone just for a moment, and when she looked up, it was already over. In her estimation, by the time he got in the truck, Jason Zehe had consumed an amount of alcohol that she described as approaching a potentially lethal quantity. One word nothing was the answer Jason had given when first asked about alcohol. The portable breathalyzer test returned a reading of 0.238. Wisconsin's legal threshold to operate a vehicle is 0.08. At 0.238, Jason Zehe was not in the range of borderline impairment. He was not at the edge of the limit where a jury might debate whether his driving was meaningfully affected. He was at a level at which most individuals experience severe disorientation, dramatically compromised motor control, significantly slowed reaction time, and deep impairment of judgment. In a vehicle traveling at more than twice the posted speed limit, those impairments carry a specific weight that can be measured in distance and seconds. The officer who read the result told Jason it wasn't a surprise. His eyes had already told them. His speech had told them. His behavior over the course of the entire evening had told them. The number was confirmation, not revelation. Jason's response was something close to, "Yeah, I already knew that." He walked through the charges, the stop sign violation, the OWI. The OWI caused injury to his girlfriend. And then, without additional preface, the officer delivered the information that restructured everything that had been said that night. The driver of the other vehicle had not survived. Jason's response fractured. He repeated the question in pieces. Something in his reaction documented, visible, did not land cleanly as grief, at least not immediately. There was a phrase that appeared in the disorganization that investigators noted without being able to fully categorize. Then, the weight of it seemed to arrive. How old was she? She was 17 years old. I should be going for life, honestly. I took a life. He was placed under arrest. His rights were read. He was transported to the police station to await the detectives who would speak with him the following day, and the judge who would set bail at $250,000. Jason Zehe was 19 years old. He had been drinking since at least early that morning. At least one adult in his girlfriend's household had assessed the situation that afternoon, recognized how intoxicated he was, and ordered him to leave. He had gotten in the truck. He had driven it at 66 miles per hour through a residential zone. He had taken a stop sign at full speed and hit Megan Voss's driver's side door directly. The charging process that followed was, in many respects, already settled on the pavement at Guthrie Road. What does this case reveal, not legally, but psychologically, about how a person arrives at this? Let's stay with the evidence. From the moment Jason Zehe was first contacted by first responders, his behavior follows a pattern that forensic behavioral analysts would recognize as incremental disclosure under pressure, the gradual, reluctant release of truth only as each prior position becomes untenable. He denied drinking entirely, then made an apparent involuntary slip. I walked it back. Eventually, acknowledged 2 drinks. Then 3 shots. Then the breathalyzer erased the arithmetic entirely. This sequence matters because its logic is not confession, it's damage control. The disclosure wasn't shaped by conscience. It was shaped by what investigators already had and what Jason could no longer plausibly deny. The early offer of a breathalyzer test is consistent with this pattern, extended either because he underestimated his actual BAC or because the gesture was calculated to project innocence regardless of the outcome. Forensic psychologists studying interrogation behavior in DUI fatality cases have identified minimization as among the most persistent and reliable features across cases. Jason's minimization was granular and sustained across the entire encounter. He described crossing the center line as going a little bit over. He framed the crash as something that had happened to him alongside what he had done to others. He expressed culpability in terms that were emotionally accessible. "I deserve a DUI. I'll take the blame," while simultaneously softening the specific factual details on which legal severity would rest. But the most telling dimension of this case is not what happened in the hospital room, it is what happened 8 months earlier. In April of 2024, Jason Z., then 18, was involved in an OWI incident in Eagle, Wisconsin. His BAC at the time was recorded above 0.15. The charge was dismissed because the crash occurred on private property, a technical provision under Wisconsin law that removed the case from prosecution. No formal consequence attached itself to that incident. He continued, by the accounts provided to investigators, to drink heavily and frequently at his girlfriend's family's home in Eagle, then drive home to West Allis. The pattern had a known trajectory. Multiple people in that household had watched it develop. On the 30th of December 2024, at least one adult recognized the situation and took action, telling Jason to leave. He drove away in the truck before his girlfriend later texted asking him to return. What the evidence is consistent with is not a formal diagnosis of anything. What it is consistent with is a sustained failure to treat other people's safety as equivalent in weight to his own immediate situation. The risk wasn't invisible to him. He was aware that he was drunk. He told police as much in multiple ways across the course of the evening. What appears to have been absent was the operational belief that the risk was someone else's to absorb someone like Megan Voss, who was approaching an intersection having done everything correctly. Jason Zehe pleaded guilty to homicide by intoxicated use of a vehicle and second-degree recklessly endangering safety. In August of 2025, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, followed by 10 years of extended supervision, 200 hours of community service, 8 of those hours to be served annually. On the anniversary of Megan's death, mandatory treatment and court-ordered sobriety. We talk about drunk driving deaths as accidents. That word implies the absence of choice. But there were choices here, small, early, compounding, that a 17-year-old girl had no way of knowing were being made on the other side of town. Cases like Megan's remind us that behind every headline is a life that existed fully, completely, right up until someone decided it shouldn't. If that thought stays with you, it should. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if the Malice Mind is where you come to understand the darkest corners of the human mind, subscribe. We're just getting started.